become ennuied with this glorious country if she had really learned to love and the object of her love were here. We encountered motorcycles of every description and passed through several shires where the National Exchange buildings, post offices, and public schools, looked like the buildings of some old barony or monastery of the Middle Ages, but with what a difference! These people were great and free, with no feudal masters to fatten and fight, or shaveling priests to feast and fatten on the fruits of their toil. Each for all and all for each, not because they were more unselfish than their less fortunate fellow men, but because they had learned that only a few could be great and rich, and acting with the wisdom and power that belonged to the majority, they had mutually agreed that none should be rich and none great except in a noble and unselfish way that made the greatness of one the common heritage and pleasure of all. Making a wide detour, we came to the Urbana River and followed its course back to the city. It was as picturesque as the Hudson, but no palaces lined its banks. Modest and unpretended cottages, comfortable and adequate, many of them beautiful in design, but all simple and unostentatious, as though built more for use than to advertise the station of the owner, faced the wide boulevard that ran by the river like the long winding streets of an old-fashioned American village. We had reached the great dam only a few miles from the city and stopped to look at the public buildings where the million horsepower of the mighty river was transmuted into that subtle, incomprehensible force that night and day, ran hundreds of miles of railroad, thousands of electric lights, rural express carriers, mills, and other public utilities. "See," said the professor as the sun touched the horizon, "a great ball of fire. The grand old sun, after lighting and warming us all day, will still by this water he has lifted from the sea, work for us all night." It was beautiful. Far up the river to a distant bend, the water above the dam lay smooth and placid and flashed like silver. On one side, a steep wooded bank descended from the boulevard to the water's edge, where were rustic seats and boathouses at intervals along. On the other side a wall of rock, perpendicular in some places, and seamed and serrated like the rough chased facade of some old giant's castle, rose sheer to the height of nearly 100 feet, over the edge of which in some places fell great festoons of flowering vines. "Those lovely banks," said the professor, after I had admired their picturesque beauty, "were once crowned with the villas of the manufacturing, commercial and financial barons of this country. The masses labored for them, the great river toiled for them. Now, where pretentious palaces once vied with each other to advertise their owners' wealth, stand the happy homes of a people who are neither masters nor slaves, and the great river too, is masterless, for lo, it works for all." At this moment, the great sun disappeared behind the horizon, and as the broad amber bars of light flashed up and expanded like flaming banners in the sky, a deep solemn chime of music came rolling grandly down from towards the city, whose outlines could but dimly be discerned against the background of night that loomed behind. On came the music, stately and grand as became the time and scene. Sinking to deep sweet symphonies that seemed to breathe the spirit of blessed contentment and repose, anon it swelled to magnificent burst of glorious music that carried a note of exultation and triumph like the exulting paean of a worldwide victory of the ages. Unconsciously I uncovered my head under the spell of the divine nocturne, and in every direction as far as I could see, on the boulevard or in boats upon the river, men stopped and listened reverentially as to the Angelus. For 10 minutes the glorious strain swelled from the tower of music, rolled out over the fading landscape, and echoed and reverberated along the walls and cliffs of the winding river. And then ceasing, with flash, 10,000 electric lights punctuated the gathering darkness, and the great city gleamed in flashing outline like the realization of a fairy scene in a story of the Arabian Nights. I looked at my host. His eyes were closed. He sat with such an expression of deep solemnity and peace upon his noble face, that I felt a thrill of awe as though in the presence of an inspired prophet of the olden time. I turned my eyes to the queenly woman that sat before me, and the spell had worked not less powerfully on her. Her head was thrown back, her hands were clasped, and from her half-closed eyes the tears were running down her cheeks. That music was a man's soul, the soul of genius, lavishing itself on earth-born clods with such beauty and power as for the moment to make them too, feel that they were divine. And what was I in the presence of a spirit like this? In the exaltation of that moment, so gross a thing as jealousy could not abide, and I felt myself a glowworm with the sunshine beating upon me. Fiddlers of Ironia! Never again could I force my lips to frame those words. No one spoke save the motorman, who, when the music ceased and the last rhythmic wave was lost in the darkening reaches of the river, uttered a deep amen, and at a signal from my host, pulled sharply on his lever and we shot away towards the city. The critical reader may observe that the conversation and discussions just recorded are better suited to an industrial congress than a drawing room or carriage ride through a beautiful country in the company of beautiful women. But it must be remembered that the astounding conditions by which I was surrounded were entirely new to me. It was as if a man should be born full-grown into the wonders of the 20th century, and as a student and politician my environment impressed me no less by the wherefore than facts of its existence. When an inquisitive boy gets hold of a mechanical toy, he scarcely awaits to see it operate before going into it to see how it operates. And so, while I was charmed and enthused by my surroundings and interested in my companions, deeply in one of them, the emotion of curiosity was uppermost in my mind. The facts of the existence of amazing facts were broadcast before me everywhere. The wherefore of their existence I was reaching after greedily. If I may use such an expression, the isness was like a world bathed in sunlight. The whyness like cloud drifts breaking over the horizon and floating towards me. All of us being somewhat fatigued with the long afternoon drive, we sat up only long enough after the evening repast to take a resume of the day and then retired. The next morning I held a conversation with Captain Brent over the telephone and then took the train for Aegea. The duties of his office prevented Professor Morris from accompanying me, and I anticipated rather a dull ride, but I had no sooner entered my compartment than I discovered that I was in the company of an original character. "Peace be unto you, brother," said he as I took my seat opposite to him in the car. "The same to you, my friend," I replied, not knowing what else to say. "Do you live in this God-forsaken city of the plain?" he asked, waving his hand in a general way towards the world outside. "Only a temporary sojourner," said I, surprised at his words and the solemn tones of condemnation with which they were uttered. "Even a temporary sojourn in Sodom will do you hurt, my brother," said he sententiously. "Come out from among them and be ye separate, saith the Holy Book." Lot was only a temporary sojourner in the city of the plain, but if you will read his subsequent history in the Divine Allegory, you will admit that it could not have been any worse with him if he had lived there all his life. These things were written in the Divine Allegory for our guidance in real life, and we do well to take heed lest we too partake of evil and so bring ruin upon us. "Sir," I said, looking at him in astonishment, "I am a stranger here, and I must confess that your language is beyond my comprehension. If I may make bold to ask, who and what are you? I perceive that you are indeed a stranger," remarked the man with an unconscious swell of pride in his voice, "or you would not need to ask that question." "I am the voice of one crying in the wilderness, prepare ye the way of the Lord, make his path straight. My name is Moses, and I am the founder and head of the Zionists. Unto us is committed the work of repairing the broken down walls, that the people may go in and out in peace. Have you not read the torchlight of truth?" I assured him that I had never seen it. "Aha!" he cried, clenching his fist and shaking it at the universe at large. "The powers of darkness conspire to keep the light from the people, but the truth is mighty and will prevail. Read this," pulling out a newspaper, the first I had seen, from a pile under the seat and handing it to me, "and when you have read it, change your garments, wash your flesh in pure water, and come into the fellowship of Zion." I glanced at the paper, which was printed in Old English, and saw that it was made up like many similar American publications of lamentations, proclamations, and execrations, and was against everything in general and the Iron Republic in particular. "Why is it," I asked, "that you employ newspapers while all other news and general intelligence is diffused by the telephone?" "Because of a conspiracy, sir, a damnable conspiracy," pounding his knee with his fist. "In the beginning we put it on the news service, but it was excluded by the Department of Public Utilities on the ground that it monopolized more than half the service while it was demanded by only a few people. And yet, sir, we put on only about 100,000 words a day. Think of it, sir, the divine truth suppressed because there was much of it and only a few people wanted to hear it. The very reasons why it should have been given even if it monopolized the whole service." "I don't quite agree with you there," I interrupted. "As citizens of the Iron Republic, as I understand it, and contributing to its maintenance, I should say you were entitled to the benefit of the news service in the proportion that your numbers compare with the population of the country at large. No more than that, but certainly that much if it is the ideally representative government that it is claimed to be." "God's curse on the ideally representative government it is claimed to be!" shouted my strange companion violently. "What does it represent, sir?" "Men, not God. The human and not the divine. God is the creator of all things in heaven and earth and should rule in both, not men. I am happy to say that Zionists do not contribute to the maintenance of such a government except in so far as they are compelled to by the use of the public utilities. They have things in common and hold themselves aloof from the exchanges so that they cannot be taxed for the support of such an iniquitous Babylon." "My dear sir," I remarked quietly, "I am a stranger to you and your creed and do not wish to enter into any discussion, but I cannot conceive how the Creator of the world can rule in it except as he does by the laws of nature, which seem to me to be inadequate for the government of a civilized state." "You cannot see how the Creator can rule the world," he exclaimed. "None are so blind as those who will not see. Read my book on Theory of Divine Government. How did he rule Israel in the divine allegory? Was it by voting and drawing lots and putting Smith, Smate, and Smothers in office over his people? Because they happened to draw their seals out of a wheel? I say no. He called and anointed his servants to rule over his heritage, to give laws and make his will known to men." "Ah!" I exclaimed, catching his drift, "you mean that all rulership should be in the hands of those only who are called and inspired for that purpose." "That is exactly what I mean," he answered. "If the people are ruled by men who are divinely called to that high function, they must be ruled according to the will of the supreme ruler, which is the only perfect way." "But how could we know who were called to these high offices?" I ventured to inquire. "How did the people know in the divine allegory that Moses and Samuel and Paul and David were called?" "Because it was revealed to these men and they made it known to the people." "How do I know that I have been called to rule this nation in the name of the Lord?" "Because it has been revealed to me and I must make it known to a stubborn and stiff-necked race, whether they will hear or whether they will forbear. The powers of darkness are leagued against the truth, but the arm of the Lord is not shortened and he will triumph gloriously over his enemies. So," I mentally ejaculated, "cranks are not the result of environment, but of our common human nature, for they breed them even in the Iron Republic." "My friend," I remarked, not wishing to argue with him as I had had some experience with this genus in America, "I have no controversy with you, being at the present time a student, and humble pupil of any who will teach me, but several times you have referred to a divine allegory. What do you mean by that, the Bible? The divine allegory, my brother, is the holy word that has been given to man in figures and emblems for his guidance in the stern realities of actual life. It is called the Bible, or Word, and gives us knowledge of the will and relation